Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. A fierce debate hanging over the nation's $31 trillion debt. This as the Treasury begins to run out of money to cover government spending. Lawmakers are forced yet again to raise the debt to avoid a default. The House took a vote today on a Republican-led bill to raise the debt by $1.5 trillion and also at the same time cutting spending. But it didn't happen without drama. NTD's Melina Wisecup has been following this closely. And Melina, what is the latest? How did this vote unfold this evening?
So this bill did pass this evening, but only by a hair. There were 4 Republicans who still voted against this bill, who were skeptical over the past couple of weeks. Now, this bill, dubbed by Republicans as the Limit, Save, and Grow Act, essentially raises the nation's debt by $1.5 trillion while also cutting from Democrats' key priorities, such as Biden's student loan forgiveness program, as well as the recently granted money given to the IRS. It also tightens work requirements for Americans to receive social welfare programs, social welfare benefits. Now, Speaker McCarthy, right after that bill passed, he came out and explained why he thinks this is a step forward for our nation's fiscal responsibility, and we'll also show you Democrats' response to this argument. Take a look.
We're going to grow this economy by making us energy independent again and getting more people, encouraging them back to work. The sad part here is now the Democrats need to do their job. The president can no longer ignore by not negotiating.
This goes back to those tax cuts from Bush in a time of warfare, goes to the Trump tax cuts, and it goes to the pandemic spending. That's the bill that's in front of us today, and we should pay it.
Now, there were some skeptical Republicans leading up to today's vote, and one of those skeptical Republicans that we heard from last Friday is Congresswoman Victoria Spartz. So she was originally undecided on this bill. Today, she showed up in support of the bill, but she told me she still wished for some more bipartisan cooperations. Here's what she told me.
We collected $4 trillion of revenue last year. Our mandatory automatic spending is $4 trillion. From roughly $2 trillion discretionary spending, that 80%, which is all in debt, like 100% of it in debt, 80% is not even authorized by Congress. And I was hoping that we could maybe find common ground and take some issues that, like site neutrality, fraudulent overbilling of Medicare, totally, bipartisan issues.
Now, the fact that there were skeptical Republicans leading up to today's vote over the past couple of weeks, that skepticism from the Republican Party did lead to some last-minute changes in this bill. Some of those changes are with regards to tightening up work requirements for receiving social welfare benefits, such as, for example, the food stamp program, as well as making sure that some clean energy tax credits were still included in this bill, but House Leader Steve Scalise told me that none of the changes were substantive. Now, as far as this bill moving forward, this is essentially Republicans' opening proposal for negotiations with President Biden because Democrat leader over on the Senate side, Chuck Schumer, says that this bill is dead on arrival in the Senate, and we also saw a veto threat from the White House just yesterday. So essentially, another bill will have to be written, or this one will have to be reformed in order for it to get Democrat buy-in in the Senate and from the White House to move forward. But essentially, this is Republicans' effort to force President Biden to come to the negotiation table and put pressure on him to raise the debt ceiling with stricter spending measures attached to it.
Switching gears to the humanitarian crisis at the southern border, in particular the exploitation of unaccompanied minors coming across. Tara Rodas is a whistleblower from the Health and Human Services Committee. She just testified at a House hearing earlier today, and we had a chance to catch up with her following the hearing. Tara Rodas, thank you so much for taking a moment for us.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for shining a light on government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking.
To that point, what was the biggest concern that was addressed today in today's hearing?
There seemed to be a little bit of a misunderstanding around vetting of sponsors and also the enforceability of post-release services. So there are things that need to be changed in the system, and I think some folks are not aware that those things are not enforceable. So to protect children, we really need to focus on who are the sponsors and holding the sponsors accountable for what happens to the children.
How long would you say that this has actually been going on right now?
Well, we know for sure that this has been going on for almost a decade, because it was in 2014 that HHS actually gave children to a trafficking ring in Marion, Ohio. And so there's a whole expose called Trafficked in America that shows how people lured the children here to the United States, held them captive, threatened to kill their families if they did not work like 12 hours a day on a chicken farm. So we know children have been trafficked through the program for years, and we really need to put an end to it.
And these so-called sponsors are essentially the guardians. They become the guardians of these children. What do we know about some of these sponsors? Anything?
We know very little about the sponsors because a case manager who's working the case never meets the sponsor in person. So they're looking at documents that they receive on WhatsApp, on their phone, at least at the Pomona Fairplex emergency intake site where I was. So they would receive photographs of documents. However, there's no law enforcement to check those. There's no investigative body to check those. And I personally saw instances where fake documentation was used so that someone could gain control of a child. So the vetting is very sketchy. We don't know a lot about the sponsors. What we do know is that some of them, once they applied, showed up as transnational criminal operators. So some of them are actually on the TOC watch list. So we have a serious problem with who these sponsors are.
What is your message to the HHS secretary?
There is a culture of speed over safety that must stop. We cannot use speed as a performance measure when we're talking about the release of children. Once HHS takes children into their care, it should not matter how long it takes to get them to a proven adult who can care for them, clothe them, ensure they're going to get to school, and ensure they get to their immigration hearing. We have to make sure these sponsors are credible. Time is irrelevant.
Tara Rodas, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Chairman McClintock, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you could just kind of tell us about the importance of today's meeting and some of your biggest takeaways.
Well, we heard graphic testimony from Whistleblower and others that have watched as tens of thousands of children are trafficked to our country, are placed with so-called sponsors and put into child labor, sexual exploitation, and it's heartbreaking. And you know, as I said, it appears many pet shelters do more vetting of their sponsors than our government is doing of the people that we're leaving these helpless children with. This was brought out in the Florida grand jury report a few weeks ago. It was brought out in the New York Times series of the fate of these children. And there's only one way to deal with it. We have to stop the incentives that allow the cartels to charge thousands and thousands of dollars each to traffic these children into our country. And as the Border Patrol officer told me, and as our witnesses told us today, the simple way to do that is get them safely home. We do that for Mexican children. We don't do that for those south of Mexico. If we were to do that, the cartel's business would dry up in an instant because they don't give refunds. And once these children are returned safely home, there's no point in trafficking them.
These sponsors, Congressman, are essentially the guardians of these minors, children, very young children. And so I guess what type of follow-up is done once they get into the United States with these sponsors that we seem to not know too much about?
Well, again, what we just heard is there's no on-site inspection of the places where these children are being placed. We generally take the word of the sponsors. And the only follow-up is a phone call. And we don't know who we're talking to in that phone call. And in the case of 85,000 children, we're not even getting answers. So they've completely fallen off the radar. And the Democrats just don't seem to care, and I find that appalling.
If you could just provide us with what you think is the solution to this.
Well, as the Border Patrol agents told me, send these children safely home. If a child shows up on your doorstep, your moral responsibility is to get that child safely home. It's not to take that child 10 doors down the street to a registered sex offender or a sweatshop, and yet that is in essence what our government is doing with many of these children.
California Congressman McClintock, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Vowing to deter nuclear threats from communist-controlled North Korea. President Biden announcing a new agreement with South Korea. He also reacts to concerns over his 2024 bid. NTD's Iris Tao brings us more from the Rose Garden.
The U.S. and South Korea announcing a key new agreement on Wednesday to deter rising threats from North Korea. As part of the pledge, the U.S. will send nuclear submarines to South Korea for the first time in 40 years.
Our mutual defense treaty is ironclad. They're particularly important in the face of DPRK's increased threats.
The announcement marks the climax of a 6-day state visit to the U.S. by South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol. And as the two reaffirm what they call
a value alliance that is strong, resilient, and sustainable.
President Biden delivers a blunt warning to North Korea, saying a nuclear attack
will result in the end of whatever regime were to take such an action.
And in return for the submarines, South Korea is reaffirming its commitment to not develop its own nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, the move to strengthen alliance with South Korea comes as the Biden administration is pivoting to focus more on the Indo-Pacific region, especially as China is expanding its influence and increasingly posing threats to Taiwan.
We discussed our work together on promoting peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits.
Domestically, Biden's facing headwinds as he announces his 2024 bid. And on Wednesday, he responded to concerns about his age and his mediocre performance in polls.
People are going to find out, they're going to see a race, and they're going to judge whether or not I have it or don't have it.
That's as he reacts to the question, "You've said you can beat Trump again. Do you think you're the only one?"
I may not be the only one, but I know him well, and I know the danger he presents to our democracy.
Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Senators from both sides of the aisle are reacting to protecting kids from social media. They say tech companies are now knowingly sacrificing children's mental health for profits. NTD's Arian Pazdar explores this issue.
We must protect our children.
A bipartisan group of 4 senators on Wednesday introduced the Protecting Kids on Social Media Act. The proposed bill would bring 2 major changes: age verification and changes to the algorithm. Under the proposal, kids under the age of 13 would be completely banned from social media. Those between the ages of 13 and 17 would need parental approval. Facebook and Instagram already have a rule saying users have to be at least 13 years of age. Now senators want to require social media apps to use professional age verification, which is already used by the Social Security Administration, Veterans Affairs, online gambling sites and more. Critics say this means users would have to give away their personal data, which could lead to data breaches. The senators dismissed the concern, saying this would limit the data social media companies are already collecting on young users. The new bill would also make it illegal for companies to feed underage users personalized content.
They can predict in the future what you might write based on what you've been tapping. If you click on one account, they can predict and therefore send you to other accounts that are like that. If you click on a video to watch it, they'll know how long you watch that video and what it says about your user habits.
Such algorithms can lead to dangerous addictions. A press release cited findings that show teens on average consume almost 9 hours of screen time every single day. And much of the content shown by algorithms is negative.
You get high engagement by a high degree of polarization and upset. And so the business model is the more we upset kids, the more money we make.
This week, Epoch Times California insider spoke with Nick Janicki, who is with Ganjing World. Ganjing World is a new tech platform with rules such as no violence, no criminal activity, nothing harmful, and nothing erotic.
As a humanity, we have to have technology for good, we have to have AI for good. Everything we do has to be for the benefit and the morality of humanity. So that's kind of the starting point of everything as we're building this out, basically.
He added that Ganjing World is an app which expands the human intellect. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.